It arrived on a grey Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when the ocean mist rolled so thick over the cliffs of Windermere that the lighthouse beam looked like a ghost's heartbeat. Arthur Wells, retired judge, 72 years old, found the envelope wedged between his morning paper and a stack of grocery ads. No return address. Just his name written in ink that trembled slightly, as if the writer's hand had known too much fear or too much age. He turned it over. The seal was unbroken, the paper yellowed ever so slightly. He frowned. The handwriting, it stirred something. A memory, faint but sharp-edged. He sat down at his kitchen table, where his old cat used to sit before time took her, and opened the letter with the precision of a man used to handling evidence. Arthur, by the time you read this, the truth may already be too heavy to bear. But the night of June 12, 1994, was not as you remember. Someone lied. Perhaps it was you. Arthur's hand stiffened. His breath stopped midway. June 12, 1994. The date he had spent 30 years trying not to recall. He rose abruptly, pacing across the kitchen. Outside, the foghorn moaned. There had been an accident that night. A death. Officially ruled a suicide, a man named Daniel Harker, found near the cliffs, his car engine still running, a note in his pocket. Arthur had presided over the inquest himself, before retiring 2 years later. But no one knew he'd known Daniel personally. No one but Margaret, his secretary back then. Could she be alive? He hadn't heard from her since she disappeared the week after the inquest. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with his will. That afternoon, Arthur called the post office. "Yes, Mr. Wells," said the clerk, "it came through the regular mail. No tracking, no sender. But funny thing, the postmark S from Windermere, only, the stamp S from 1994. Arthur felt the room tilt slightly. He thanked the clerk, hung up, and stood staring at the kitchen clock as if it might start ticking backward. That evening, he went down to the cliffs. The fog clung to the rocks like a second skin. Someone had left fresh flowers on the rail, white lilies, damp from the mist. And under them, another note. "You forgot something, Arthur." He froze. Then turned, but the path behind him was empty, the fog silent. And for the first time in 30 years, he realized he was no longer certain what really happened that night. The following morning, Arthur sat at his kitchen table again, the letter unfolded before him like a crime scene photograph. He had barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of sea wind against the shutters made him think someone was out there, watching. He'd lived alone for nearly a decade now. After Margaret vanished, the loneliness had grown roots, deep and twisted. But last night, standing at those cliffs, seeing that note, "You forgot something," it awakened something else, a dull, persistent fear he hadn't felt since his days on the bench. He turned on the radio to drown out the silence. But the news didn't help. A voice announced that a journalist, Ethan Cole, was coming to Windermere to investigate unresolved cases from the 1990s, including the Harker incident. Arthur's coffee went cold. He hadn't heard the name Harker spoken aloud in 20 years. He still remembered Daniel Harker's face, young, confident, too self-assured for his own good. A novelist, a dreamer. And a man who, 3 decades ago, had threatened to publish something that would change everything. Then, a week later, he was dead. And now some journalist wanted to dig him up again, metaphorically or otherwise. By noon, Arthur had convinced himself it was a coincidence. By 2, he wasn't so sure. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Arthur hesitated before opening it. On the porch stood a tall man in his 40s, holding a notepad and wearing a trench coat too thin for the coastal chill. His smile was polite but practiced the kind of smile people used when they wanted information, not friendship. "Mr. Wells, my name's Ethan Cole. I'm doing a piece on unsolved cases here in Windermere. Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" Arthur's hand tightened on the door frame. "I'm retired. I have nothing to add." "Of course," Ethan said easily. "But it's not every day one gets to speak to the judge who presided over such a fascinating case." Arthur gave him a hard look. "Fascinating isn't the word I'd use." Ethan shrugged, unbothered. Harker was an interesting man. Brilliant writer, so I hear. You knew him personally? Arthur froze. "Why would you think that?" "Just a hunch," Ethan said, scribbling something. "I found a note in the archives, a personal letter addressed to you from him, dated 2 days before his death. Never delivered." Arthur's pulse quickened. "That's impossible." Ethan handed him a photo from his phone, an image of the letter, photographed under archival glass. Arthur recognized the handwriting instantly. Harker's neat, steady script. "Arthur, if anything happens to me, know this, the story isn't fiction. You'll understand when you see the clips again." M was right. Arthur sat down heavily. "Where did you find this?" "County records," Ethan said. "Filed with some old evidence. I can get a copy if you'd like." But Arthur wasn't listening. His mind was racing back to 1994, to that night, the storm, the argument on the cliffs. Margaret's voice crying out in the dark. And Daniel's eyes filled not with fear, but something close to triumph. He remembered shouting. The sound of waves crashing. Then silence. He had told himself for years that Daniel jumped. But now he wasn't sure he'd ever seen him fall. Later that evening, Arthur pulled out an old metal box from the bottom of his desk drawer. Inside were remnants of a life long buried, newspaper clippings, a fountain pen, a faded photograph of 3 people standing near the cliffs: Arthur, Daniel, and Margaret. He hadn't looked at it in years. They'd all been younger, happier. The photo was taken during the summer of '93, the year before it all went wrong. Daniel had been writing a book back then, The Weight of Silence. He'd told Arthur it was inspired by true events, though he'd never said whose. Arthur traced his finger along Margaret's face. She'd been clever, quiet, and deeply loyal. Until the end. Until she'd come to him one night, pale and shaking, saying Daniel had discovered something about a case Arthur had ruled on years earlier. Something that could destroy everything. And then, within a week, Daniel was dead. And Margaret was gone. The next morning, Arthur decided to confront Ethan. He found him at the Windermere Inn, sitting by the fire with a laptop and a mug of black coffee. "You said that letter, Harker's letter, was never delivered," Arthur began. "That's right," Ethan replied, glancing up. "Postmarked June 12, 1994. Same date he died. Do you have it now?" "The original not yet. But I requested the file. Should arrive tomorrow." "Why, Judge Wells, something on your mind?" Arthur hesitated, then said, "Let's just say, the past isn't as dead as people think." Ethan leaned forward. "You think someone else might have killed him?" Arthur gave him a thin smile. "I think truth has a way of killing on its own." Ethan chuckled. "I'll drink to that." But when Arthur left the inn, he noticed something odd. A woman was sitting in the corner of the lobby, half hidden by a potted fern, her face obscured by a scarf. When he stepped outside, he caught her reflection in the glass, her eyes following him. Something in the tilt of her head, the way she held herself, it was familiar. Unsettlingly so. He turned quickly, but she was gone. That night, Arthur dreamt of the cliffs again. The storm. The shouting. But this time, when he looked down, he didn't see Daniel at all. He saw Margaret. Her eyes, wide with shock, her hand reaching out and Arthur's own voice shouting her name. He woke with a start, heart hammering, the sound of the sea echoing through the house like distant applause. On his nightstand lay another envelope. No stamp. No address. Just one line written across the front, "It wasn't Daniel who fell." Arthur's hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, the same one from his desk, only this time someone had drawn an X over his face. And beneath it, in tiny, neat handwriting, "See you soon." Arthur woke before dawn. The fog outside pressed against the windows like something alive, shifting and whispering. The photograph lay on his desk, the X over his face darker now, as if the ink itself had thickened overnight. He hadn't imagined it, someone had been inside his home. That realization chilled him more than the ocean wind ever could. He sat down heavily, the floorboards creaking beneath his slippers. He poured a small glass of brandy, a habit he'd abandoned years ago, and watched the liquid tremble in his hand. Who could have entered his locked house without breaking a thing? He thought again of the woman at the inn. The scarf, the watchful eyes. Could it be Margaret? No, that was impossible. Margaret was gone. The police had searched for her for months after she disappeared. Her car was found near the cliffs. Her bag, half buried in sand. No body. But no one survives the sea at Windermere in winter. And yet, someone had sent him those letters. By mid-morning, he made a decision. He dressed, shaved carefully, and walked to the Windermere Inn. The clerk at the desk gave him a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Wells. Here to see Mr. Cole again." "Perhaps," Arthur said. "Is he in?" "Left early. Said he was going to the archives." Arthur hesitated. "Did he check out?" "No, sir. Still has his room." But the clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You might want to know he wasn't alone when he left. A woman met him here around 6 this morning. Older, dark hair, long scarf." Arthur's pulse slowed. "Did she give her name?" "Didn't he say? But she looked familiar somehow." Arthur stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sun finally cutting through the fog. He glanced toward the road leading up the hill toward the old courthouse that now served as a municipal archive. He started walking. The courthouse was quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to forgotten buildings and unspoken truths. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight that filtered through cracked windows. Arthur found Ethan in the reading room, bent over a file box. The journalist looked up, surprised. "Judge Wells. Didn't he expect to see you here this early? I hear you had company this morning." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" "A woman. Dark hair. Scarf. You left the inn together." Ethan shook his head. "I came here alone." Arthur's gaze hardened. "Then someone's following both of us." Ethan blinked, then closed the file slowly. "You're serious, aren't you?" Arthur nodded. Tell me what you've found. Ethan hesitated, then turned the file toward him. Inside were several documents, photocopies of police reports, court transcripts, and a letter from 1994 marked confidential. It's all about the Harker case, Ethan said. But there's something strange. The official record lists Daniel's death as a suicide, yes, but the witness statement, it was yours, wasn't it? Arthur stared at the paper. His own name in black ink. I never gave a witness statement. I was the judge. Exactly, Ethan said quietly. But look at this signature. Doesn't it look forged? Arthur's stomach twisted. The handwriting was neat, practiced, and unmistakably Margaret's. He leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. She forged it? Why would she do that? Arthur rubbed his temple. Maybe to protect me. Or herself. I don't know anymore. Ethan studied him. What really happened that night, Judge? Arthur didn't answer. He stared at the old courtroom through the open door, the benches where he once sat, the gavel still lying on the dais. 30 years ago, he stood there believing he was preserving justice. Now he wasn't sure he preserved anything at all. That afternoon, Arthur returned home to find his door ajar. The house was quiet, too quiet. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Someone had been there again. The drawer where he kept the first letter was open, its contents scattered. But the letter itself was gone. On the table lay a new envelope. This one bore no writing on the outside, only a faint scent of lavender when he opened it. Inside was a torn newspaper clipping, local woman presumed dead after cliff fall, January 1995. Police have confirmed that Margaret Holloway, former secretary to Judge Arthur Wells, is missing and presumed dead after her vehicle was found near the cliffs at Windermere. No body was recovered. Across the article, someone had written in fresh black ink, presumed isn't the same as dead. Arthur sat down hard, the room spinning around him. He reached for the phone, then stopped. Who would he call? The police would laugh. Elderly man spooked by old letters. They file it under confused retiree and forget. No, this was between him and Margaret, whoever, or whatever, she become. That night, the fog returned thicker than ever. Arthur lit a fire in the hearth and poured another drink. The flames flickered across the framed photograph of the three of them, him, Daniel, and Margaret. He stared at Daniel's smile. So confident. So sure of his story. And suddenly, it came back to him. The argument. Daniel had accused him of altering a verdict years earlier, a corruption case, involving a local businessman. Arthur had dismissed the charges, claiming lack of evidence. But Daniel had found something: letters, proof of a bribe. And Margaret had been caught in the middle. She begged Arthur to come clean. But he hadn't. He'd chosen silence. That night, Daniel had threatened to go public. Arthur had followed him to the cliffs. There had been shouting. A struggle. Then nothing but the sound of waves. And Margaret. Margaret had seen everything. The knock at the door came just before midnight. Arthur froze. The fire crackled behind him. He opened the door slowly, and there she was. Older, yes. Her face lined, her eyes shadowed, but unmistakable. Margaret. Alive. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the wind filled the silence. Finally, she said, "Hello, Arthur." He stared at her. You're dead. A faint smile touched her lips. Not yet. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping over the room, landing briefly on the photograph. You kept it, she said softly. Arthur swallowed hard. Why now, Margaret, after all these years? She looked at him for a long moment, then said, because the sea doesn't keep secrets forever. It gives them back. He frowned. What are you talking about? She reached into her coat and placed something on the table, a silver locket, tarnished and damp with salt. Inside was a small photo of Daniel. They found him, she said quietly. Or what's left of him. The tide uncovered the cave 2 weeks ago. And in his hand was this. Arthur stared at the locket as if it were a weapon. Why send the letters, he asked. Margaret's voice was steady. Because you forgot what you did, Arthur. But I never did. For a long moment, Arthur could only stare at the locket on the table, a tiny, corroded thing, yet heavier than all his years of judgment and law. The fire crackled softly behind him, the shadows of the flames dancing across Margaret's tired face. You said they found him, Arthur whispered. After all these years, why now? Because storms erode even the best-kept graves, she said quietly. The sea gives up what we think it's swallowed. Arthur's throat tightened. And what did it give up, Margaret, the truth or just the bones? Her eyes lifted to meet his, still sharp, still unrelenting. Both. She sat down, pulling off her gloves with slow precision. Her hands were pale, veined, trembling just enough to betray what her voice would not. That night, she began, Daniel told me everything. About the files, the letters, the money. He wanted to expose it, Arthur, but not just you. The entire court system. You were only the beginning. Arthur's voice was hoarse. I was protecting justice. Margaret laughed softly, a sound that wasn't amusement but disbelief. Justice? You were protecting yourself. Your name. Your legacy. The man who never made mistakes. He turned away, his hands tightening on the back of the chair. He would have destroyed everything. And for what? A scandal, the ruin of a lifetime's work. For the truth, she said simply. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Only the wind filled it, howling softly against the old windows. You think I killed him, Arthur said finally. You did, she said. Maybe not with your hands, but you killed him all the same. Arthur turned, his face pale, his eyes hollow. You were there, he said. You saw. Margaret nodded slowly. I saw you grab him. I saw you shout. I saw the rage, the fear, and then I saw him fall. Arthur pressed a hand to his forehead. I didn't push him. I tried to stop him. He slipped. Margaret's eyes softened for a moment. Maybe. But when you left, he was still alive. Arthur froze. What? You walked away, Arthur. I stayed. I climbed down toward the rocks, but by the time I reached him, the tide was coming in. He looked at me and he said your name. She looked into the fire. Then he told me where the papers were hidden. His manuscript. The one you thought burned in that fire. I kept it. Arthur's pulse quickened. You kept it all these years. She nodded. It's in safe hands now. Ethan has it? Arthur's voice cracked. Ethan, you brought him here. He found me first. He wanted the story, I wanted the truth told. We made an agreement. Arthur sank into the chair, rubbing his temples. And the letters. Margaret's eyes glistened. My way of preparing you. Of warning you. So that when the story came out, you'd have time to remember and to face what you did. You wanted to destroy me. No, she said softly. I wanted to free you. Arthur laughed bitterly. Freedom, you've given me a death sentence. Margaret stood, her voice trembling now. You sentenced yourself 30 years ago, Arthur. You just never served the time. Dash dash. There was a long silence. The fire had burned low, shadows crawling across the walls. Arthur's gaze shifted toward the window, and for the first time, he noticed headlights approaching through the fog. Ethan's car. Moments later, a knock echoed through the house. Margaret didn't move. Arthur went to the door. Ethan stood there, coat wet, eyes alert. Sorry to interrupt, Judge. But I think we need to talk. Arthur's voice was hollow. You've already talked to her. Ethan nodded slightly. Yes. But you deserve to know the rest. He stepped inside, pulling a file from his coat pocket. The manuscript Daniel left behind, it wasn't fiction. It was a confession. He wasn't exposing corruption, he was involved in it. The letters, the evidence, they were forged to blackmail you. Arthur stared at him. That's impossible. Ethan opened the file. Inside were photocopies, Daniel's handwriting, familiar but frantic. If Arthur refuses to pay, I'll release the letters. Margaret believes me, she must never know. Margaret froze. No, that can't be true. It is, Ethan said quietly. He used you both. Arthur sank back into his chair, his voice barely a whisper. Then, all this time? Ethan nodded. Daniel wasn't the victim. You were. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. But he said. He lied, Ethan said. He planned to fake his death, disappear with the money. Only, the storm came sooner than he thought. Arthur closed his eyes. The sound of the waves outside felt deafening now. So I didn't kill him. Ethan shook his head. No. But your silence afterward did the rest. Dash dash. Margaret stepped back, her hands trembling. I spent my life hating you for something you didn't do. Arthur looked up at her, weary, but somehow lighter. Maybe I did something worse. I believed I was innocent. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The fire flickered, dying slowly into embers. Finally, Margaret whispered, "What will you do now?" Arthur smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. The same thing I should have done 30 years ago. Tell the truth. He looked at Ethan. You'll have your story? Ethan hesitated. Are you sure? Arthur nodded. People deserve to know what silence costs. Dash dash. The next morning, the fog lifted. For the first time in days, the ocean was calm, glassy and indifferent. Ethan's car rolled down the coastal road toward town. In the passenger seat beside him lay the file, the manuscript, the letters, the truth. Arthur had refused a ride. He said he needed to walk to feel the cliffs again. When Ethan glanced back one last time, he saw the old man standing by the railing, coat flapping in the wind, gazing out at the gray expanse of sea. Margaret stood a few feet behind him, her scarf fluttering. She wanted to call out, but something held her back. Arthur turned slightly, met her eyes, and nodded once, a silent farewell. Then he stepped closer to the edge. Dash dash. They found his cane hours later, leaning against the railing. No note. No struggle. Just the endless sound of the waves. In his house, on the kitchen table, lay a single envelope. Inside a handwritten page, signed in Arthur's careful script. To whoever finds this. Truth is not what we remember. It's what we finally admit. And sometimes, that admission is the only kind of justice left. Arthur Wells. Margaret read it once, twice, then folded it gently and placed it back on the table. Outside, the tide was rising again, washing clean the footprints on the path to the cliffs. Balance scale epilogue. Weeks later, Ethan's article went live, The Forgotten Letter, A Judge, A Secret, and The Sea That Never Forgets. It became a national story, a mix of tragedy and truth. Margaret never gave interviews. She moved inland, to a small town near Portland, where no one knew her name. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in, she thought she heard the faint sound of a voice calling from the cliff, steady, calm, unafraid. And though she told herself it was just the wind, she always whispered back, "I remember."